So
You know, this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
This morning, we're continuing our journey through Dimensions, a casebook of alien contact written by Dr. Jacques Vallée, one of the heroes of the weird. We're going to be diving into chapter 6, which is called The Psychic Component, Metalogic. So kind of tying up everything we've learned about before, which is a bunch of sightings since the beginning of time so far, and putting a little metalogical bow on top of it. But let's go ahead and start with the first section, Return of a Specter. And before we get that, let's get into the wasteland. Return of a Specter. It's difficult for the public to tolerate a mystery that refuses to die. When encounters with unidentified flying objects were suddenly reported all over the United States during the first half of October 1973. After 7 quiet years, and when 2 men from Pascagoula, Mississippi, told their tale of abduction by grotesque robot-like creatures, the public recognized the return of a specter that science had pronounced dead and buried with great pomp just a few years before. The burial had been performed by the University of Colorado at the cost of $500,000, and the 800-page post-mortem had clearly stated that the study of UFOs, quote-unquote, cannot be justified in the expectation that science will be advanced thereby. Professor Edward Condon, boo, who led the study, felt so strongly about the uselessness of the whole thing that he destroyed the project files. 3 days before his death in March of 1974, he was still urging a physicist friend to drop his study of UFOs. When Condon was told that a documentary was being prepared, he advocated that all the footage be burned. The Air Force subsequently closed down its own public relations office for the monitoring and sighting reports, Project Blue Book, with a similar declaration. So, like, you know, it's like a movie where the bad guys won. They shut down Project Blue Book because Condon had the Condon Report. The final blow. And that's as it stands to this day. That's how universities feel about UFOs for the most part. I mean, not necessarily. There's a bunch of, you know, we read a lot of modern professors and cool people who are into this stuff now, but that kind of set the tone and buried it for a long time. Made it so you had to, like, talk about it in secret. When the sightings again filled the world press, it became clear that the subject of UFOs was alive as ever. It was easy for flying saucer enthusiasts everywhere to exclaim, "We told you so!" But it was not so easy for the witnesses to understand what they had seen. It was even harder for them to forget it. Some never will. A husband and wife who drove a truck in the Midwest were fired from their job when they reported that an object had followed them along the Missouri Road one October night, emitting a burst of light that blinded the husband, inducing some loss of eyesight, and caused the plastic frame of his glasses to melt. Oof. Like the Pascagoula story of robot-like monsters, facts were unbelievable to local scientists who examined them out of context of the overall phenomenon. Yeah, exactly. When he says out of context of the overall phenomenon, he's talking about the history of it that we've been reading about. So you have to, each case, you have to look at it in terms of how many cases have been like this before, which guaranteed there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, and what it means, what happened to the eyewitnesses, how did they change, all that cool stuff. Professor Condon had the same problem. Incredibly, all the members of his team had been selected because they had no previous knowledge of the subject. Yet, It is only when one analyzes the thousands of similar occurrences in the last 40 years and in all the countries that one achieves some degree of understanding. During the 1970s, the report of the paranormal events in connection with close encounters with UFOs seems to have become the rule rather than the expectation. The rule rather than the exception. And most investigators have found it very difficult to deal with this aspect of the cases because it does not match their expectation of what an extraterrestrial visit would be. Such paranormal events might take the form of minor unexplained coincidences in which a man might have had a dream prior to the sighting or answered a knock on the door only to find no one there. Maybe he just got ding-dong ditched though, you know? As happened to a policeman who later the same evening reported being paralyzed by two occupants of an unknown craft. Well, that may, because that could just be a highly complex ding-dong ditch operation that includes a faux abduction operation as well. Or maybe the guy got ding-dong ditched and then aliens, just a bad night. That's just funny that that's part of the story. I mean, I'm with him on he got paralyzed and robot creatures took him, I believe, but sometimes the event was more significant. A number of witnesses, for example, reported perceiving distinct messages inside their heads, a fact they interpreted as the indication of a telepathic ability on the part of UFO occupants. And yeah, that goes with a lot of UFO and alien lore and what people say when they do communicate with entities that they're psychic, they could read each other's thoughts. That's why there's not really a lot of conflict where they're from. But I don't think we're ready for that. I think that would be really scary for us to turn psychic all of a sudden. All of us, at least. Still, other categories of psychic events are the distortions of time and space reported by witnesses and the apparent violations of physical law represented by the sudden appearance and disappearance of physical craft. And as we saw in previous chapters, close observers often report something akin to a trip into a parallel time stream. These observations constitute collectively what I call the psychic component of UFO phenomena. Telepathic communication, the entities phasing through walls, being taken to a place where time moves really slow for you. It seems like maybe a day when a few weeks have passed in our time. Another aspect of the sightings that I find interesting is the very same aspect that has made scientists from other disciplines turn away in disgust. I am referring to their apparent absurdity. My field of research is the nature of information, its use by people, its transliteration in the form of documents, its application to artificial intelligence, and its representation in the behavior of automata. I don't know what that is. We'll have to look up a definition. The techniques of this field can be used for compiling observations, sorting them out, classifying them, and looking for new patterns. A few scientists are pursuing this task in spite of the apparent absurdity of the data. Their work to unravel the UFO enigma centers increasingly on the psychic component of the reports that is indicative either of the actual communication with witnesses or of direct influence unexplainable by ordinary physical means. Everything he's referring to in this chapter, like when he's like, psychic events that happen, the physical events, the people being paralyzed, taken to another world, that's all in the rest of the book and the other read-throughs. So check them out if you're interested, or pick up the book and read it. It's a really, really good one. Support old Jacques Vallée. Anywho, in the foothills of the California coastal range, just west of the city of Menlo Park, where the Stanford linear accelerator plunges straight under the newly constructed expressway, there is a spot of unusual beauty. It is situated within a mile or so of a densely populated area, yet it gives one a feeling of utter loneliness. The linear accelerator stretches deep into this valley, guarded by wire fences, yet the fields around it have kept a sort of bucolic charm. Where the accelerator ends, there is a funnel-shaped depression that is not visible from the road. It is from that depression that a man saw an unusual object rise one evening in February 1972. The man was first attracted to the object by a humming sound that it made. Let us note, once again, that humming sounds, buzzing noises, and sounds compared to the swarming of bees are commonly reported as the auditory perception associated with UFOs. He stopped his car, and he and his companion got out. The hum became more distinct as the object came into view. It was glowing red. It flew in a straight line up the hill, as if following the roof of the elongated tunnel. Then it flew down again and was lost from sight in the valley, but not for long. It soon came back into view, and this time it took off, rising very high and very fast as it passed overhead. The two men below saw it clearly. It was somewhat like looking directly at the sun, they said, although contours of light were sharp. The impression was not like observing a strong projector attached to a flying object. It was more like looking through a window that opened on the inside of a star. Whoa. Oh, right on. The witness who told me this story mentioned having previously seen unidentified objects. On a certain occasion in Montana, he had observed two disc-shaped craft crossing his path, and they had come to hover in a field. He walked toward them and approached within 75 feet. He had the intense feeling of being under observation, even at that distance. He used the word communication. But how could you tell? I asked him. You've mentioned no window, no indication that there was life on these objects. Have you ever been close to a whale? The witness asked me, implying that he had the vague feeling that the object somehow was aware of him, as a wild animal is aware of, but it appears to ignore the presence of a person. Accounts such as the one I have just quoted abound in a corner of the psychic house that too few people interested in paranormal phenomena ever take the trouble to visit. Amen. In the last 25 years, at least 10,000 sightings of unidentified flying objects have been filed away unexplained by competent investigators. I am not referring here to the number of cases reported, but only to those unsolved. And my figure is a conservative one. Yeah, so I'm talking hundreds of thousands of people. Because there's the ones that are reported, then there's the ones that are explained. The ones that are explained by, let's say 95% of those are actually explainable, some natural phenomena. There is cool things like ball lightning, all that stuff. Then there's ones that are just the 5% that are just explained away by stuff like, oh, it's just swamp gas, kind of random explanations, possible mass hysteria, but could be real. But this 10,000 unexplained ones, and that includes these wild cases we've read about in here, like the Hopkinsonville goblins, old Joey and his space cracker. Come on. But no bridge has yet been built between this body of data and the evidence that exists for psychic phenomena such as precognition, psychokinesis, and telepathy. Such a bridge is needed, not only because current research on parapsychology could shed light on some of the more mystifying UFO incidents, but also because in return, an understanding of the nature of the UFO phenomena could provide new insights into unusual events that have not yet been duplicated in a laboratory. It would give a clue to the mechanism of some psychic process. The nature of the problem can be illustrated by another example, a report given to me by a woman living in Berkeley, California, who once observed a series of 5 round objects crossing the sky over East San Francisco Bay. She immediately thought they must be balloons. Then the first one accelerated, and upon reaching a certain spot, shot straight out of sight at an unbelievable speed. She thought, I gotta get one of those balloons. The second object did the same a few moments later. Then the third object dashed ahead and vanished in the sky. And the fourth, and finally the fifth, the sky was again empty. But in the mind of the witness, there was a strange thought. The strong suggestion that this was all right for her to see. This was accompanied by another thought which almost came as an explicit message. This was nothing that she should report. And indeed, she went home without breathing a word of the event to anyone until she attended a lecture where I raised the question of the possibility of unconsciousness or repressed contact. How frequently witnesses decided to withhold this kind of information has already been noted. I said no beebles and baubles, my friend. No thank you. But yeah, have a seat. If we disregard the last part of the woman's testimony, she is simply another person among millions of Americans who believe that at one time or another they have seen a UFO. And like I'm saying, if you have a story that you'd like to tell, please let me know. Come in, let me know whenever you want to tell it. Because as always,
we're ready to believe you.
Whether it's just a UFO, ghosties, ghoulies, goblins, abduction, whatever it may be, we believe. And I want to hear about it. As someone who's never had an experience himself, let me live through yours. So the witnesses withholding information. Oftentimes the witnesses withhold the weirder parts of their story when they tell authorities, like with Betty and Barney Hill, right? They withheld the abduction parts and the lost time stories. Well, the lost time part of the story and the landing part of the story when they told the military and the police. But when they went to talk to their therapist, that's when they told the weirder aspects of it. So people withhold the, the stranger things. That's why dollar to donuts, and I always say it, lights in the sky, creature running by. If you have seen lights in the sky, dollars to donuts, someone around in the area had an entity-like experience or another psychic type experience, or there were a lot of synchronicities happening in the area. That's just how it goes. But do we have a right to disregard that section of her report? And what happens if we take into consideration the fact that she distinctly felt a direct imperative message had been implanted in her mind, and that it was as much a part of the occurrence as her sensory observation of the 5 luminous objects? What happens if we examine the files of sightings with an open mind regarding such psychic components? We find that phenomena of precognition, telepathy, and even healing are not unusual among the reports, especially when they involve close-range observation of an object or direct exposure to its light. And this allows me to tell one of my favorite stories that we've read about here, and it was in American Cosmic, I believe. No, it was in Encounters. Either Encounters or American Cosmic. Sorry, I read through both of them, so you're going to have to read them or watch them to find out. Anywho, DW talks about one of the people she talks to, one of the believers and encounterers that she talks to, and their first encounter with a being that healed something. They were a complete non-believer, but one night, him and his wife, they were just at home, and their little pup, they had a little chihuahua, it was a little old pup, started just, it was basically like paralyzed, coughing up stuff. They called the vet. They thought it was done for. They called the vet. They made an appointment to go in. They feared they were going to have to put the dog down. That's what they all thought they were going to have to do. And they're really distraught over it. They go to bed. The wife is just praying out loud for it. And then in the middle of the night, the husband wakes up to a scream. And but it's like not like a scared one, right? It's like a whoa kind of thing. But he feels paralyzed. He's just like, for some reason, he just can't get up. But then he forces himself to get up and he goes downstairs. And what he sees is their dog on its dog bed and a little ball of light going over the dog. And for some reason, he gets the message beamed to him, go back to bed. And he goes back to bed. And he lies there in bed for like 45 minutes, he says, or he doesn't know how long, but it seems like forever. And he comes back downstairs, and then finally, the urge to just stay in bed for whatever reason leaves, and he goes downstairs. The wife is like so excited, she's happy, she's crying. The dog's running around. It's like healed, and the dog was healed. And then according to what according to the wife, she was like, yeah, I prayed for it. So the angels or whatever just healed it. The guy who's not a believer in this is like, doesn't know what the fuck to believe. He saw a ball of light, but when you talk to the wife, she saw this like mist kind of envelop the dog. So they had these two different encounters. They saw two different things, which goes to what Jacques Vallée talks about. Dr. Vallée talks about how these things might be interdimensional and might depend a lot on what our perceptions are. They might, that whole like the whole thing of we're living in like a projected hologram of our, we're just in like the universe's imagination, or however you want to put it. It kind of like goes to there, I guess. I don't know. So with the healing cases especially happen when they involve close range observation of an object or direct exposure to its light. The following case is among the most thoroughly investigated accounts of the interaction between human perceptants, those who have perceived the phenomena by whatever means, and the phenomena of UFOs. It involves a medical doctor who holds an official position in southern France. What is unusual about this case, which occurred on the night of November 1st, 1968, is that competent investigators, including an astrophysicist, a psychiatrist, and a physiologist, were able to gain rapid access to the data to monitor the development of subsequent events without interference from the press or from government authorities. The witnesses want absolutely no publicity in connection with their experiences. Neither his patients nor his immediate family know of the events. Shortly after 4 a.m., the doctor was awakened by calls of his 14-month-old baby, experiencing some pain because 3 days earlier he had injured his leg while chopping wood and still had a large hematoma, an area of accumulated blood under the skin. He got up and found the baby gesturing toward the window with excitement. Through the shutters, the doctor saw what he first took to be flashes of lightning, but he paid little attention to this, gave a bottle of water to the baby, and went on to inspect the house. For it was raining very hard, though no thunder could be heard. The light flashes continued, coming from the western part of the wide landscape that can be seen from the south of the house, which is built on the side of the hill, opening a large window that leads onto the terrace. The witness first observed the objects. There were two of them, disc-shaped, horizontal. No fancy baubles for me, my friend. Thank you. Horizontal, silvery white on top and bright red underneath. Other details of the objects that the doctor was later able to recall include horizontal quote-unquote antenna and a vertical antenna on top, while a perfectly cylindrical beam of white light illuminated the mist under the discs. The flashes, which occurred with periodicity of about 1 second, were marked by a brief increase in the luminosity of both discs, followed by a sudden burst of light between them. The objects were moving in unison towards the left, that is, towards the center of the doctor's field of view, and they were coming closer, their apparent size increasing while the object that seemed farthest away came to align itself with the closer one. While they were still approaching, following the trajectory of the beams on the ground enabled the witnesses to ascertain that they were indeed coming close. These two discs went through a remarkable transformation. Their antenna came into contact, and the two beams interpenetrated the flashing and the flashing activity stopped. The two craft had merged. After these events, the witness wrote a detailed account of his sighting with sketches. He awoke his wife and told her what had happened. At that point, it was she who observed with considerable amazement that the swelling and pain in his leg had completely disappeared. In the days that followed, he became aware that all the after effects of a wound he had received during the Algerian War had also disappeared. Complete revitalization. French science writer Amy Michel, a researcher with the French radio and television organization, visited the witness on November 8th 6 days after the sighting and found him tired. He had lost weight since the observation and was very distressed by what had happened to him. That same day, he experienced cramps and pains in the abdomen, oh no, and red pigmentation around the navel, forming a triangle. By November 17th, this seemingly preposterous phenomena was well developed. Examinations by a dermatologist led to negative results, but the specialist was so intrigued by this triangular pigmentation without a cause that he decided to document it as a report to the French Academy of Medicine. The witness, who had not told the specialist that everything had started with his observation of a UFO, requested that on the contrary, he give the phenomenon no publicity. During the night of November 13th and 14th, the doctor had had a dream in which a triangular pattern was seen connected with a flying disc. The same triangle appeared on the baby's stomach a day or so after the witness's examination. Oh no. The psychosomatic explanation first proposed by Amy Michelle had to be discarded when the investigator, who kept the witness under close observation, published the results of his 2-year follow-up of the case. He noted that there had been no reoccurrence of either the war wound or the wound on the leg. The peculiar triangle, however, continued to come and go on both the father and the son, and would stay visible for 2 or 3 days at a time, even when the child was away and staying with his grandmother, who knew nothing of the sighting and was very much alarmed when she saw the triangular pigmentation. The recurrence of the triangle was observed every year and was again recorded in 1986 and in 1988. Like the grandmother, friends of the family still know nothing, but they have noted a change in the mental attitudes of the doctor and his wife. They seem to have acquired an almost mystical acceptance of the events of life and death. Hell yeah. Which is puzzling to those who have known them previously. Finally, there is the matter of the paranormal phenomena that now take place around them. Coincidences of a telepathic nature are frequently reported, and the doctor has allegedly on at least one occasion experienced levitation without being able to control it. What? Clocks and electrical circuits have been affected apparently without cause. Such phenomena are not unprecedented. Cases of uncontrolled levitation or gravity effects have been reported in connection with UFOs. Imagine. Whoa! So if Mothman was perched up here on the statue, this is what it would be like. In one case, which took place in 1954 in the French countryside, a man who was coming back from the fields with his horse had to let go of the bridle, as the animal was lifted several feet into the air. A dark circular object was flying fast over the trail that they were following. What? No, not my horse. That's like nope. Neither is the change in life patterns an uncommon fact among witnesses of close encounters with such objects. An awareness of the paranormal has been inspired by such sightings in men like Edgar Cayce. As a child, Cayce met a woman who appeared out of a sphere of radiant light and told him that he would be able to heal the sick when he grew up, in the words of Thomas Surgrue. As soon as the weather was good, he went back to his retreat in the woods. There was one afternoon in May he became aware of the presence of someone else. He looked up. A woman was standing before him. "Your prayers have been heard," she said. "Tell me what you would like most of all so that I may give it to you." "Most of all, I would like to be helpful to others, and especially to children when they are sick." Suddenly, she was no longer there. He looked at the place where she had stood, trying to see her in her beams of light, but she was gone. Edgar Cayce's sighting is reminiscent of several cases that fall into the category of religious experiences. Although the initial observation is often linked to an unusual flying object, as in quote-unquote miracles of Lourdes and Fatima, which we will analyze in Chapter 7, and in the visions that led to the founding of the Mormon Church, such miracles often give the percipients healing or prophetic powers. Woo! What a mouthful. Metalogic. What do we know of the nature of the communication that is reported to occur between human witnesses and the occupants of UFOs? I have earlier commented that on the surface, such communication appears to be simply absurd. The word absurd, however, is misleading. I prefer the expression metalogical. When a witness meets a UFO occupant who asks what time it is and replies it's 12:30, only to be bluntly told, "You lie, it is 4 o'clock." This actually happened in France in 1954. The story is not simply absurd, it has a symbolic meaning beyond the apparent contradiction of the dialogue. What an interesting dialogue to have with an alien. Could it be that the true meaning of the dialogue is time is not what you think it is? Or any measure of time can only be relative? True. In 1961, similarly, Barney Hill found himself trying to explain to the humanoid examining him that time was an important concept for us on Earth. The humanoid appeared not to understand what he meant. The point of these incidents seems to have been to convey the fact that consciousness transcended time itself. Situations such as these often have the deep poetic, paradoxical quality of Eastern religious tales. What is the sound of one hand clapping? And the mystical expressions of the Kabbalah, such as references to a dark flame. If you strive to convey a truth that lies beyond the semantic level made possible by your audience's language, you must construct apparent contradictions in terms of ordinary meaning. In the above contact case in France, the next question was about space, and again was absurd. "Am I in Italy or Germany?" asked the UFO pilot. What scientist would take such a story seriously? What public official would risk his reputation by reacting in earnest? Even a priest might avoid it for fear of demons. In fact, some witnesses have thought they had seen demons because the creature had an unpredictability and mischievousness associated with popular conceptions of the devil. If you wanted to bypass the intelligista and the church, remain undetectable to the military system, leave undisturbed the political and administrative levels of society, and at the same time implant deep within that society far-reaching doubts concerning the basic philosophical tenets. That is exactly how you would have to act. At the same time, of course, such a process would have to provide its own explanation to make ultimate detection impossible. In other words, it would have to project an image just beyond the belief structure of the target society. It would have to disturb and reassure at the same time, exploiting both the gullibility of the zealots and the narrow-mindedness of the debunkers. This is exactly what the UFO phenomenon does. Metalogic is a form of consistency found in statements like, does a unicorn have a horn in the middle of her forehead? Yes. Is there a such thing as a unicorn? No. I have pointed out that the concept current among most flying saucer enthusiasts, that the unidentified flying objects are simply craft used by visitors from another planet, is naive. The explanation is too simple-minded to account for the diversity of the reported behavior of the occupants and their perceived interactions with human beings. Could the concept serve precisely as a diversionary role in masking the real, infinitely more complex nature of the technology that gives rise to the sightings? Observations similar to the landing at Pascagoula, where two fishermen claimed to have been abducted by quote-unquote clawmen, have been made every year in the United States since 1947. A catalog of well-documented close encounter cases would hold the details of well over 2,000 cases of that type, from all countries, indicating that a formidable impact is being made on our collective psyche. Yet, what trace has this produced on scientific efforts? A small one indeed. A few courageous astronomers are beginning to revise the probability estimates for other civilizations in space. Much is made of the possibility of detecting radio signals from other solar systems, and a few physicists are beginning to voice their doubts concerning Dr. Kunden's biases. Against such a background, I am afraid that my own speculations may contradict both ideas of the believers and the assumptions of the skeptics. Here, then, is a brief statement of the 5 new propositions based upon the material we have reviewed so far. 1. The things we call unidentified flying objects are neither objects nor flying. They can dematerialize, as some reliable photographs seem to show, and they violate the laws of motion as we know them. 2. UFOs have been throughout history and have consistently received or provided their own explanation within the framework of each culture. In antiquity, their occupants were regarded as gods, in medieval times as magicians, in the 19th century as scientific geniuses, in our own time as interplanetary travelers. Statements made by occupants of the 1897 airships include such declarations as, "We are from Kansas," and even, "We are from anywhere, but we'll be in Greece tomorrow." And he's talking about like the bearded men that the cowboys met out in the plains. Yeah, it's like they showed up like very 1897 style, very steampunk style with like beards, piloting like a craft that all these moving parts. 3. UFO reports are not necessarily caused by visits from space travelers. The phenomena could be a manifestation of a much more complex technology. If time and space are not as simple in structure as physicists have assumed until now, then the question, where do they come from, may be meaningless. They could come from a place and time. If consciousness can be manifested outside the body, then the range of hypothesis can be even wider. 4. The key to an understanding of the phenomena lies in the psychic effects it produces, or the psychic awareness it makes possible in its observers. Their lives are often deeply changed, and they develop unusual talents with which they may find it difficult to cope. The proportion of witnesses who do come forward and publish accounts of these experiences is quite low. Most of them choose to remain silent. 5. Contact between human percipients and UFO phenomena always occurs under conditions controlled by the latter. Its characteristic feature is a factor of absurdity that leads to rejection of the story by the upper layers of the target society, and an absorption at a deep unconscious level of the symbols conveyed by the encounter. The mechanism of this resonance between the UFO symbol and the archetypes of the human unconscious can be abundantly demonstrated by Carl Jung, whose book Flying Saucers makes many references to age-old significance of the signs in the sky. We got to get that, man. We got to get Carl Jung's Flying Saucers. That'd be a good one. I'm not regarding the phenomena of the UFOs as the unknowable, uncontrollable game of a higher order of beings. Neither is it likely, in my view, that an encounter with UFOs would add to the human being anything it did not already possess. Everything works as if the phenomena were the product of a technology that followed a well-defined rules and patterns, though fantastic by ordinary human standards. It has so far posed no apparent threat to national defense and seems to be indifferent to the welfare of individual witnesses, leading many to assume that we may be dealing with a still undiscovered natural occurrence. It cannot be intelligent, quote unquote, say some people, because it does not attack us. But its impact in shaping man's long-term creativity and unconscious impulses is probably enormous. The fact that we have no methodology to deal with such an impact is only an indication of how little we know about our own psychic world. Averyon, or the essence of prophecy. 2 well-investigated cases have contained striking psychic elements. One took place in Averyon, France, and the other one in Kansas. They support the 5 propositions mentioned above. On June 15, 1966, in Averyon, a region of France situated near the Mid-Pyrenees, a 76-year-old woman made the first in a long and fascinating series of sightings on an isolated farm. The farmhouse itself is old, with 10 rooms whose windows face south and command an excellent view. I was at the window just for a moment. Because my age, you need a breath of air wherever you are. But never have I seen lights like that, nor things like that. They weren't just lights, they were fires. The old woman became fearful, and the words she used to describe her anguish convey the precise feelings that many witnesses have tried to express in all languages. All these fires, I'm too old, I don't want to see things like that. If this thing's going to move about like that, what's to become of us all? Afterwards, it moved again, over by the corner of the vineyard. You remember speaking to her son-in-law? That's when I called you. That's when I was frightened. But if that comes any closer, that's going to go in the barn, and everything will go up in smoke. The house and us with it. So I called him. Mrs. Ferdinand Lagarde, a local researcher who conducted a very thorough investigation of the events, reported that the haunting thought of fire frightens all country people, and so distracted and scared, she calls her son-in-law to help, and later she will tell us that she went to bed fully clothed for fear of what might be to come. This is a story with all the ring of truth about it. The fiery objects were spherical, and they crossed the fields with deliberate motion. The son-in-law, who worked the farm, also observed what the old woman had seen and went out to investigate. The objects, he said, were rounded on top and rather flattened underneath, and they vanished on the spot as if controlled by a switch. At one point, there were 6 of them, less than a mile away. They moved in one line at the speed of a tractor, and they entered a larger luminous object that appeared as a sort of fiery tree, an illuminated shell. Everything disappeared, and the witnesses retired in complete puzzlement. This feeling was still very clear in the taped interviews I heard during the trip to France. And Lagarde confirmed that everything appeared to the witnesses disconcerting and irrational. The events went on, in quote-unquote, in the calm of night, without a sound, unreal and dreamlike. The luminous spheres came back to the farm in Averyon 6 months later on January 6, 1967. The farmer had gone out to check on the animals when he suddenly saw one sphere, not more than 50 yards away. He decided to get round behind that thing to see what it was, having assumed that it had a front and a back. But when he got outside the gate, the sphere was next to it, waiting for him. He had left it inside the yard a moment before. The man then decided to take a small path through the fields and again get behind the object. But the sphere proceeded to follow him over about 60 yards and went to block the entrance to the path. It was a confrontation, man. It was about to be like, "What's up? Sphere me up, bud." From the incident itself. That there thing followed me for about 60 meters near enough. And then there was a narrow bit where I wanted to get through, and I did. So to get round behind, then that followed me right along, till I stopped there, where I wanted to get round behind, and then the machine stops there too, right at the narrow bit. So I says, now, 'tain't no use to argue, I can't get past. Coming back into the house, the farmer called his son, and going outside, they saw 6 spheres this time, and they were so afraid that they went back inside the house. And good call. The larger shell-shaped object was there too, and it was giving off a beam of light as if it was a searchlight. There was a searchlight on top right at the end of it, and it lit up that window up there. Lit up the whole room, it did. I had the window opened on the opposite. Was it a diffused beam, or rather very concentrated? Oh, concentrated, very concentrated. And it lit up your room? Yes, it lit up all right. Off and on like. It was turning, it kept on turning. It was turning round and round like a beacon? Yes. Sometimes it lit up the next room down there. It kept on turning round. But there it was, at 11 o'clock, or maybe 11:15, something like that. Then, sudden like, everything died out. It all died out. And I didn't see anything anymore. I don't know if it had gone or if it was still there. The culmination of the series of sightings in Averyon took place on January 11th, 1967, when the son saw the quote-unquote shell coming down near the house. He drove near it and could see that it was very large indeed. 2 of the smaller spheres entered it, and then it became very bright, and the witness heard a whistling sound. The shell tilted at a 45-degree angle and was gone at an incredible speed. Another object came, It was shaped like a disc, with 2 transparent cupolas on top of it. And inside, ... and here's from the witness. Well now, inside it seemed to me to be lit up inside with a green light, inside the 2 domes. And I saw, mind you, I can't be sure about this, it was very dark. You might have said there was some sort of fog, either inside or outside, don't know which. Inside or outside of the 2 domes anyway, I thought I saw 2 people like human beings, see? Cosmonauts. They wore overalls like air crew, green trimmed and with white. The object itself was hovering with a motion forward and back, pitching and rolling, the investigator asked. Did you have a car door shut during this time? The response was, yes. I must have opened the window, I think, or perhaps it was afterwards, when it went off, that I opened the window. And then I felt a wave of heat, and I felt myself I couldn't move a hand or foot for as long as it lasted. About a week after, the witness began to have trouble with his sleeping habits. He would sleep as much as 20 hours a day, and in spite of his parents' advice, he didn't want to consult a doctor. And this is very common. A lot of the encounters we've read about, the people just sleep and they're very tired afterwards. He simply couldn't stay on his feet without exhaustion hitting him. And this went on for about 2 months. Something else happened to him in connection with his sleeping pattern. In the early morning hours between 4 and 5 a.m., it seemed to him that he was quote-unquote floating off. His mind would be alert, although his body was paralyzed, and he would feel his consciousness leaving his body. In later conversations with investigators, I learned of changes in the witness's behavior and belief system. He surprised everyone in this remote area of France by recommending to young people that they should study astronomy and science in general with great care. And in a private discussion with one of the researchers who have for several years followed up this remarkable case, he casually mentioned that he might soon have to write a book. It was pointed out to him that he could hardly write even the most simple letter. They told me not to worry about that, he said. When the time is right, I will know what to put on paper. We are touching here on the very essence of prophecy. They told him. But who are they? It seems that in recurrent dreams since the incident with the flying disc, he has seen a number of men dressed in red, and each holding a book and pointing at it. Nothing else happens in the dream, just the men and the book. More recently, he has traveled over 200 miles to visit the investigator of this case, who has left precise instructions to keep him closely informed of any new important development. When he was in the investigator's house, he did have something important to say, but he could not talk. The part of his brain that handled verbal expression and the mechanism of language could not process the data that he knew was there. Next, let's talk about the Delphos case. On the evening of November 2nd, 1971, on the Johnson farm located near Delphos, Kansas, an unknown object was reported to have come down almost to ground level and to have then taken off. It was seen by a young man and later by his parents, and it would simply have gone into the annals of ufology as one of the many thousands of landings if it had not been for the several secondary effects the object created. It affected animals. It left peculiar traces on the ground, as in the French case at Averyon. It affected the witness's sleeping patterns. Here again, the young son of the farmer is the main witness. 16-year-old Ronald Johnson was tending the sheep accompanied by his dog when the sighting happened. What he saw was a mushroom-shaped object illuminated by multicolored lights over its entire surface and hovering 25 yards away, within 2 feet of the ground. Its diameter was about 9 feet. The glow from the object was such that Ronald could see no details, and it was making a sound like an old washing machine that vibrates. Then it brightened at the base and took off. The witness reportedly became temporarily blind during all this, and the dog was, quote-unquote, very quiet. After several minutes, Ronald, regaining his sight, ran into the house to call his parents, and all came out again to see the object. Now high in the sky and over half of the full moon size, it vanished into the distance. The 3 witnesses went around the house to the site of near the landing where and were surprised. They said to observe a glowing ring on the ground. Parts of nearby trees were also glowing. The texture of the soil, reports an experienced investigator, Mr. Ted Phillips, felt strange, and a slick crust as if the soil was crystallized. And Mrs. Johnson noticed that her fingers went numb as if the local anesthetic had been applied. She is a nurse at a nearby hospital, and for 2 weeks this condition prevented her from taking the pulse of her patients. The next day, the ring was still clearly visible, with a dry and crusty appearance. The inside and outside of the ring were damp from the recent rains, but the ring itself was perfectly dry. 32 days later, when Ted Phillips was able to go to the scene, snow had fallen and was melting both outside and inside the ring. But the 1 foot wide ring was perfectly white. We removed the snow from one section of the ring and introduced water into the exposed ring area. The soil would not permit the water to pass through the surface. This was most remarkable, as there had been several inches of rain and snow. Phillips removed a sample from the ring and observed that it contained a high concentration of whitish material. Well, you didn't analyze it, Phillips? The soil under the ring was dry to a depth of at least 1 foot. We all know that obvious it's some whitish material. That's what everyone. This is not an isolated occurrence. Hundreds of reports, ring-shaped patterns have been gathered, and many of them refer to white substance or a powder at the site. A similar occurrence took place in New Zealand at a place named Waihoke in January 1965. The ring there was visible for 4 years before it finally was covered with grass. It is curious that in spite of all the excitement caused by the Delphos case and the attention it received from quote-unquote scientific ufologists and from skeptics, no one, believer or skeptic, ever bothered to identify the white substance itself. And that's what I'm talking about. Thorough analysis of the soil have been made, however, showing no significant difference between the inside and the outside of the ring. I eventually obtained a sample of the white substance from Mr. Phillips and forwarded it to the biology laboratory in France, where it was examined under a microscope with magnifications ranging from a few diameters to the maximum enlargement possible under the oil immersion technique. The white substance was resolved into fibers, thus destroying the quote-unquote explanation of the case put forth by Philip Klass in his book UFOs Explained, where he claimed that the substance was produced by the urine of sheep feeding from a circular device. What? That's as wild as the UFO explanation. Fibers were vegetal in nature and belonged to an organism in the order of actinomycetales, which is an intermediate organism between bacteria and fungus. Oh, interesting. The French biologist who identified it and who was wished not to be named in this book determined that the organism belongs to a family of actinomycete, and the genus is Nocardia. It is often found together with a fungus in the order of Bisidonomycetes. Wow, all these big words. Which may fluoresce under certain conditions. This fungus can cause a circular pattern to be visible in the surface of the ground. This is undoubtedly the explanation for the UFO rings, but the coincidence of this fungus ring with the observation made by Johnson remains to be explained. One possible interpretation is that high energy stimulation triggered by the spectacular growth of the Nocardia and of an existing fungus and caused the latter to fluoresce, as in all the glowing. So it could just be these mushrooms doing some crazy stuff we don't know about yet. The effects of the glowing object on animals were consistent with other landing cases. During the sighting itself, the dog was very quiet and still. The sheep were bellowing, but like the dog, they were almost glued to the spot. The boy could not move either, but it was not clear to him whether this was due to fear or another cause. The behavior of the animals after the sighting was remarkable. For about 2 weeks every evening at sunset, the sheep would jump out of the pen and run wildly. The dog would ferociously try to get into the house at nightfall. He practically destroyed the screen door. and the only way to keep him outside was to replace it with a stronger metal door. There were striking effects to the witness himself, too. First, he suffered from strong eye irritation. His eyes were red and watery. Then came headaches and nightmares. These nightmares, lasting about 1 week, were so vivid that he would wake up his parents with loud screams. He had the same dream night after night, in which human-like creatures looking into his window from the outside. 2 or 3 times when coming into his bedroom, his parents found him screaming, standing by the window. Woo! The confusion technique in the contact ritual. Earlier, I recounted the story of a witness who was asked the time by a UFO occupant. "It is 2:30, the witness replied. "You lie, it is 4 o'clock, said the occupant. I am indebted to Gerald Askevold for bringing to my attention a fascinating story by Dr. Milton Erickson, a pioneer in modern hypnosis, concerning the quote-unquote gentle art of reframing." Whoops. Almost fell in my chair. "One windy day, a man came rushing around the corner of a building and bumped hard against me. I stood bracing myself against the wind before he could recover his poise to speak to me. I glanced elaborately at my watch and courteously, as if he had inquired the time of day, I stated, 'It's exactly 10 minutes to 2, though it was actually closer to 4 p.m., and walked on. About half a block away, I turned and saw him still looking at me, undoubtedly still puzzled and bewildered by my remark." After quoting this story, psychologist Paul Waltzewick comments in his book, Change. This is how Erickson described the incident that led him to the development of an unusual method of hypnotic induction, which he later called the confusion technique. What had taken place? The incident of bumping into each other had created a context in which the obvious conventional response would have been mutual apologies. Dr. Erickson's response suddenly and unexpectedly redefined that same context as a very different one, namely, one that would have been socially appropriate if the other man had asked him the time of day. But even that would have been bewildering because of the patent incorrectness of the information, in contrast to the courteous, solicitous manner in which it was given. The result was confusion, unalleviated by any further information that would have reorganized the pieces of the puzzle into an understandable new frame of reference. As Erickson points out, the need to get out of the confusion by finding this new frame makes the subject particularly ready and eager to hold on firmly to the next piece of concrete information that he is given. The confusion, setting the stage for reframing, thus becomes an important step in the process of effecting second-order change and of, quote-unquote, showing the fly the way out of the fly bottle. Was the alleged UFO pilot trying to show the witness the way out of a similar maze? Is the confusion technique deliberately used to affect change on a major scale? Answering such questions could also help us to understand the strong resemblance that anyone who has examined the beliefs of esoteric groups could not fail to note between certain UFO encounters and the initiation rituals of secret societies. This quote-unquote opening of the mind to a new set of symbols that is reported by many witnesses is precisely what various occult traditions also try to achieve. The UFO occult connection. The case of Jose Antonio. A case in point is the story of Jose Antonio, an enlisted Brazilian soldier in the military police of Minas Gerais, and orderly to Major Celio Ferreira, who commanded at the time the Guards Battalion. An investigation conducted by Mr. Brant Alexio and published in the Flying Saucer Review, November and December 1973, disclosed that one Sunday afternoon in May 1969, Jose Antonio was fishing on a lagoon north of Belo Horizonte when he suddenly became aware of figures moving behind him. He saw a burst of light hit his legs and felt a numbness that caused him to drop his fishing rod and fall to his knees. He was seized by two masked individuals, about 4 feet tall, wearing dull aluminum suits, who took him to a machine that looked like an upright cylinder. Inside this craft, the beings gave him a helmet similar to their own, tied him up, and took off. This is exactly what's still being reported in South America, down in Peru, that happened recently with the jetpack. It was, people say jetpack miners. It wasn't, but that's a whole other thing. But it is still going on. So it's the same theme still happening in South America. Like a guy with like weird technology and a jetpack kind of and a cylinder thing, kidnapping people with this strange helmet. That's still being reported. The higher the machine seemed to rise, the more difficult did breathing seem for the soldier. At one stage, in addition to his state of low morale, he felt as though his whole body was physically tired out, almost paralyzed. He felt more and more uncomfortable in this position, owing to the hardness of the shape of the seat and the numbness in his legs and the weight of the helmet, the corners of which were bruising his shoulders and neck. After a period of travel that seemed quote-unquote indeterminable, the machine landed with a jarring sensation, and the little men unfastened Jose Antonio. They put a bandage over his eye holes in his helmet and carried him with his knees dragging on the ground. He heard footsteps and the sound of many people talking. Finally, he was placed on a backless seat, and the bandage was removed. Jose Antonio found himself in a large quadrangular room, 30 by 40 feet, and about 15 feet away from a robust dwarf, who stated to him with apparent satisfaction, the dwarf was extremely hairy. His long tresses, reddish and wavy, fell down behind past his shoulders to his waist. His beard was long and thick and came down to his stomach. He had wide set eyebrows with 2 fingers thick, running right across his whole forehead. His skin was light-colored and very pale. His eyes were round, larger than is the norm with us, and of green shade, like the color of green leaves beginning to wither. Other beings of similar appearance began arriving until 15 dwarfs were in the room. The soldier assumed there was a door in the back beyond his field of vision. The 3 walls he could see had no window and no door. To his left was a low shelf with the corpses of 4 men. He thought they had been killed by a homunculi. The whole room seemed to be made of stone, and at one point Jose Antonio was given something to drink out of a cubical stone glass, and the cavity containing a dark green liquid was in the shape of an inverted pyramid. The lighting in the room was uniform and intensely bright and from no identifiable source. On the left wall were paintings of animals, a jaguar, a monkey, a giraffe, an elephant, also vehicles, houses. In the far right angle of the room was something that looked like an upside-down racing car. He watched while the homunculi examined all his fishing equipment and carefully took one of every item in duplicate. They kept one specimen of each type of fishing hook and a single banknote from a total of 35,000 old cursorios, or old banknotes. The leader of the dwarfs began a strange conversation with the soldier. It was conducted entirely through gestures and drawings, and revolved around the concept of weapons. Jose Antonio thinks that they must have perceived that he was in the military and illustrated this by their actions. At one time, a little man shot a beam of light against a stone wall. The communication seemed to be to request Jose Antonio to help the little beings in their relations with Earth. Was he to be their guide among them? Like their guide among men? This was what Jose Antonio understood. He gestured his refusal and began praying, fingering the rosary he always carried with him. The leader stepped towards him and, displaying irritation for the first time, seized the crucifix and snatched it from him. One of the beads rolled onto the floor and was picked up by one of the little men, who showed it to the others. The crucifix was passed around in the same way, arousing the curiosity of all of them. While this discussion took place among the homunculi, Jose Antonio had a vision of a Christ-like entity, his eyes clear and serene, barefoot and wearing a dark robe. The figure made some revelations to Jose Antonio, who now refuses to disclose them. The apparition vanished, and the irritated dwarfs blindfolded him again, and he was transported back. As the machine landed, he felt that he was being dragged, and he lost consciousness. He woke up alone near the town of Vitoria, in the state of Espirito Santo, 200 miles from the spot from where he had been fishing. He had been away for 4.5 days. This is like Brazil's Fire in the Sky case. It had this. We have the Travis Tyler, I believe, the Fire in the Sky, the Fox movie they made. They made it way terrifying, but it was a much more terrifying but also peaceful experience for the guy. But he disappears for 3 days. He's not 200 miles away from where he originally was, but miles away from where he got abducted or was last seen. His friends actually saw him get abducted. Anywho, there is a curious parallel to this case in the experiences of Robert Monroe, whose investigations of out-of-body travel have already been mentioned. On a particular occasion, he had the feeling of being outside his body, fighting with two small beings. Desperate for a solution, I thought about fire, and this seemed to help a little. However, I got the impression that they were both amused, as if there was nothing I could do to harm them. By this time, I was sobbing for help. Then I saw someone else coming up out of the corner of my eye. I first thought it was another one, but this was very definitely a man. He simply stopped a short distance away and watched what was taking place with a very serious expression on his face. He wore a dark robe down to his ankles. I could not see his feet. Same as Jose. As in the case of, well, Jose saw his feet, I think. In the case of Jose Antonio, the apparition was a taller man. The apparition of the taller man was the signal of the end of the ordeal. Initiation rituals are characterized by the following phases or general scenes, often combined or developed into complex themes. 1. The candidate is confronted by members of the occult group wearing a special costume, the aliens in this case, or entities. 2. He's blindfolded. 3. He's led by the arm through a rough and difficult route. 4. He's taken into an especially designed chamber with no windows and is placed in such a way that he could only see part of it. 5. He is brought into the presence of a quote-unquote master. 6. He is given a test and made to answer questions. 7. He is shown a variety of symbols designed to remind him of death. 8. The situation suggests that he may not survive the ordeal. 9. He is given ritual food or drink. 10. He is blindfolded again and led outside. All the same things happened. It's like an occult group kidnapped him, not some aliens. All these elements are present in the case of Jose Antonio. To this we must add that everything in the room appeared to be made out of stone. The drinking cube with the inverted pyramid cavity is an exquisite last touch. All right, rounding the bases here to wrap us up today. Wild ride. I didn't think we were going to connect the occult today to it all, but I love that. The case of Paulo Gaetano, another remarkable case from South America, will close this chapter, raising further possibilities for the nature of confrontation. On November 17, 1971 at 9:30 p.m., a Brazilian man named Paulo Gaetano was driving back from the town of Navidad de Carangola, on a business trip. With him in the car was another man, Mr. LVO B. As they passed the town of Baneiras, Paulo felt the car was not pulling normally, and he mentioned this to his companion, who reacted by saying only that he was tired and wanted to sleep. The engine stalled and Paulo had to stop the car on the side of the road. He then saw an object about 12 feet away. A red beam of light was projected at the car and seemed to cause the door to open. Several small beings appeared, took Paulo into the craft, and made him lie down on a small table. Fastening his arms, they lowered from the ceiling an apparatus that resembled an X-ray machine. He felt a cut near his elbow, and the beings collected his blood. Investigators from the SBEVD research group in Brazil saw and photographed the wound 3 days later. Then he was shown 2 panels, one of them a plan of the town of Itaperuna, the other a picture of an atomic explosion. Paulo felt very heavy. He remembers being helped by Elvio, but does not recall how they got back home. The interesting point is that the witness was not alone. Did Elvio see the flying saucer? No, he only saw a bus. Near Benarius, Paulo had begun to show signs of nervousness, Elvio reported. He told him that there was a flying saucer accompanying them, when in fact what was following them was a bus, which was keeping at a reasonable distance behind the car. Elvio added that the car had slowed down and stopped, and that he had come to the assistance of Paulo after he had fallen to the ground behind the car, with the door on the driver's side remaining open. Elvio managed to get Paulo on his feet and started with him by bus towards Itapurna, where Paulo was examined by the first aid station. The police sent a patrol to the site and found Paulo's car on the highway. Elvio was unable to explain what had happened to Paulo and why the door was open. He did not remember when Paulo had gotten out, and he could not explain why they had taken the bus. The police found no trace on the car that could explain the wound on Paulo's arm. And there we go. Paulo and Elvio, right? Paulo has this insane abduction experience, and Elvio is asleep. He fell asleep. They put him to sleep. It's like, again, the little Chihuahua case we talked about today where it was healed. The guy comes down and sees it. He's like, I'm going back to bed. You know, he got out of bed to go check it out, but then was put back to sleep until the incident was over. Right? Same with Elvio here. It wasn't meant for him. So they put him right to sleep. You know, it reminds me of the Andreessen affair. A family watching TV in the living room, all awake, all together. They are all paralyzed and put to sleep by a group of entities that take the mother. I still have to go I have to just buy that book so I can read it all on stream. Very interesting seminal case in UFO abductions. But that's a whole family falls asleep and they wake up all in their own beds. Some of them not in their own beds. Some experiments with microwaves suggest that it is becoming technically feasible for sensory impressions to be projected into people's minds at a distance. Is this part of the technology that is involved in the UFO phenomena? What? I never heard about that microwave technology piece. Man, if they were doing that back in the 60s and 70s, what they got now? Here again, we must ask, are we dealing with a technology that systematically confuses the witness? If so, it must be possible to duplicate it. If certain areas of the human brain can be remotely stimulated, then it is not impossible to think of broadcasts literally saturating large territories with a flood of symbols. Such a technology could be an important factor in the confrontation with advanced psychotronic devices. Woo! And that is chapter 6 of Dimensions, a casebook for alien contact. And that has been your Saturday morning book club. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good one, everyone. Ta-ta.